Emotions and feelings. What the heck is the difference? Well, welcome to part 3 of my series on emotional availability and responsibility. In part 1, I argued that emotional regulation is an inside job. In part 2, I talked about how emotions can be trained. This, part 3, is the piece where I try to show you how, by looking under the hood at what a feeling actually is and what an emotion actually is, and why almost everybody uses those two words to mean the same thing. So here's a claim that I want to make, and then I'll spend the rest of this video earning it. Your feelings and your emotions are not the same thing. They arrive in a particular order, and once you can see the seam between them, you find something most of us never knew was there. A little place to stand. A little leverage over an inner life that has always seemed to just happen to us. So let me start with the distinction between the two. A feeling, as I'm using the word here, is just raw data. It's the literal sensation you sense in or on your body, and it arrives before you've made it mean anything. A tightness in the chest, a flush of heat in the face, a drop in the stomach when your phone buzzes. Feelings come at us from two directions. From the outside world, could be a tone of voice, an image on a screen, a cold wind. And from the inside, could be a memory that surfaces or a thought that drifts through. That stimulus interacts with your physiology and generates the sensation. Either way, internal or external, the feeling itself is pre-verbal. It's just there, the way a note is there when a string is plucked. You literally feel the feeling. An emotion is what comes next. An emotion is the interpretation of the feeling, the meaning your mind assigns to that raw sensation. The tightness in your chest is a feeling. I'm anxious, this is going to go badly, I always do this. That's the emotion. It's the story wrapped around the sensation. And here's the part we're slowing down for. The sensation and the story are two different events with a gap between them. Even though they happen so fast, they feel like the same thing. Eckhart Tolle points at this same seam from a slightly different angle. He describes emotion as arising at the meeting place of the body and the mind. The body producing a sensation, the mind producing a narrative, and emotion living right there at the confluence of the two. The body offers the raw material, and the mind decides what it means. Which raises the question that this whole series has been circling. If the meaning is assigned, if there's an interpretive step, then who's doing the assigning? And could they get better at it? As I've said before, we tend to talk about feelings like weather. They roll in, they roll out, and we're just standing in the field getting rained on. And to be fair, the feeling part really is a lot like weather. You don't get a vote on the flush of heat or the drop in the stomach. Those arrive unbidden. But the emotion, the interpretation, is not the weather. It's what you do with the weather. And that is trainable because it runs on something you have more say over than you think, which is your attention. Consider a phenomenon you're already familiar with. The book 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership devotes an entire commitment to feeling all the feelings. The practice of letting a feeling move all the way through you to completion, rather than clamping down on it or, just as damaging, grabbing hold of it and refusing to let it pass. Notice what that assumes, that a feeling, left alone and simply witnessed, will dissipate. It's when we seize the feeling and start narrating it on a loop that a passing sensation hardens into a durable, self-refreshing emotional state. The feeling was going to move through. The story is what makes it stay. And what determines whether you simply witness a feeling or seize it? Where you put your attention. Stephen Covey, in the first of his 7 habits, draws 2 circles. The circle of concern holds everything you're aware of and care about, but can't necessarily control. Could be the economy, the weather, politics, other people's choices, the past. The circle of influence holds the smaller set of things you can actually control, or at least influence. His observation is simple, and once you see it, almost impossible to unsee. Where you habitually park your attention shapes your entire emotional life. Live out in the circle of concern, brooding on everything you can't touch, and you feel anxious, resentful, and powerless because you've trained your attention on precisely the things guaranteed to produce those emotions. But if you pull your attention back into the circle of influence, onto what's actually yours to do, the emotional weather changes. Not because the world changed, but because your attention did. Tony Robbins compresses the whole idea into a sentence I come back to constantly. People don't experience life. They experience the life they focus on. Two people can stand in the identical situation and live in two different emotional worlds because they're attending to two different slices of it. The situation is shared, the focus is not. So here's the chain the whole piece has been building. Feelings arrive on their own. Emotions are the meaning we assign them. That assignment is governed by attention, and attention, unlike the weather, can be trained. Which leaves one question: how? The answer is almost annoyingly old. You train attention through meditation. I know, for some of you, that word still carries a faint whiff of incense and hocus pocus, so let me hand you the least mystical version of it I know. Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, or MBSR, is an 8-week entirely secular program, closer to physical therapy than to anything religious. And what's remarkable is what happens to people who do it. Jon Kabat-Zinn, in the introduction to the second edition of his book, Full Catastrophe Living, summarizes the research, and one finding is worth the price of admission. Scientists had long assumed that a person's emotional set point, like a signature pattern of activity between the two sides of the prefrontal cortex, was essentially fixed in adulthood. You were dealt a temperament, and that was that. Then they scanned the brains of people who'd completed 8 weeks of MBSR, and the set point had moved in the direction associated with handling stress and difficult emotion more skillfully. 8 weeks. A trait thought to be permanent turned out to be trainable. There's more, and I'll keep it to a single brushstroke because I don't want to bury the point in neuroscience. The same body of research found that after 8 weeks of MBSR, the amygdala, the little alarm bell deep in the brain that appraises threats and floods you with reactivity, actually grew thinner, while regions of the brain tied to emotional regulation and perspective taking grew thicker. The brain, it turns out, reorganizes itself in response to how you direct and flex your attention. It's called neuroplasticity, and the practical translation is this: paying attention on purpose over time physically remodels the machinery that generates your emotions. It really is weight training for the mind. And notice the spirit of it. Kabat-Zinn is insistent that this only works with a light and gentle touch. No forcing, no straining, no grim self-improvement campaign. You're not bullying your mind into submission. You're patiently developing your capacity to direct your attention at will. Which brings us back to the word that this whole series started with: responsibility. Pull responsibility apart and look at what's inside it: response and ability. Our ability to respond. That's not a coincidence of spelling, it's the entire thing in miniature. Between the feeling and the emotion, between the stimulus and the story, there is a gap. A reaction is what fills that gap automatically, on autopilot, the way it's always filled it. A response is what becomes possible when you trained enough attention to actually stand in that gap and choose what story you want to tell. That's what all three of these videos have really been about. Emotional responsibility isn't stoic suppression, and it isn't blaming yourself for having feelings. It's the cultivated ability to respond rather than react. And now you know where that ability is built. It's built in the gap between the feeling and the emotion, and the tool that builds it is trained attention. So I keep coming back to the idea of a dance as a metaphor for an intimate relationship. And I'm going to land there one more time because it turns out the metaphor was about attention all along. Remember the thing that surprised me most about partner dancing? Each dancer is responsible for their own balance. What looks like one person holding the other up is really two people, each holding their own center. And how do you hold your own center on a dance floor or anywhere else? Attention. Balance is attention. The continuous, gentle, moment-to-moment noticing of where your weight actually is, and the small corrections that keep you upright. Lose your attention, and you lose your balance. Train your attention, and you can dance. So this is the practice underneath the whole series. Feelings will keep arriving. That's not up to you. You're a human being. That's just what happens. But in the gap before they harden into emotions, you get to place your attention. And that placement is a skill you can build a little bit every day with a light and gentle touch. Do that, and you slowly become someone who responds instead of reacts. Someone who can keep their own balance. Someone, in other words, who is genuinely able to respond, which is all that responsible ever meant. That's the inside job. and it's the most worthwhile training I know. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. If any of this resonates, the simplest first step is also the smallest. 10 quiet minutes once a day, just noticing where your attention goes and gently bringing it back when it wanders off. Each time you do that is one rep. I go much deeper on attention, emotion, and the invisible wave underneath all of it in my book, Surfing the Invisible Wave, and in the companion deep dive course. You can find out all about both of those things and a lot of other resources that I have for you available at invisiblewave.surf.